And good evening, everybody. So a speech about foreign workers given by the Home Secretary Amber Rudd back in October at the Tory Party conference has been officially recorded today as a hate incident. But should it ever have been investigated as a hate incident in the first place? I have to say, I think this is absolutely crazy, and I will go through, over the course of the next hour, what actually constitutes a hate incident and why I think this is the most enormous waste of police time and public money. Rudd had said in her speech that she wanted to make it harder for British companies to employ migrants and to ensure that foreign workers were, quote, not taking jobs that British workers could do. Here's a little of her speech.
The test should ensure people coming here are filling gaps in the labour market, not taking jobs that British people could do. But it's become a tick-box exercise, allowing some firms to get away with not training local people. We won't win in the world if we don't do more to upskill our workforce. It's not fair on companies doing the right thing, so I want us to look again at whether our immigration system provides the right incentives for businesses to invest in British workers.
The speech was followed by a background briefing by an aide who suggested that firms could be required to publish lists of foreign workers. Rudd herself confirmed the next day that such lists were not an option. And the idea was very quickly dropped. Now, into all of this comes LBC and one James O'Brien. O'Brien did not like the speech one little bit. And on his morning show, he, purporting to be reading out a speech, part of a segment of the speech, actually read out a couple of paragraphs from Mein Kampf. And he finished up by saying that we're living in strange times. But there was quite a lot of reaction. It wasn't just James O'Brien. There were lots of people really very unhappy about this. And one of them was Professor Joshua Silver. He's an Oxford University physics professor, and he decided he would complain to the police. I felt politicians have been using hate speech to turn Britons against foreigners, and I thought that it is probably not lawful, he told the Times. His complaint was dealt with by West Midlands Police as the Tory Party conference took place in Birmingham. Incidentally, today, when Professor Silver was interviewed, he admitted he hadn't actually seen the speech. He'd just listened to what O'Brien and the rest of the commentariat had said. National police reporting rules introduced in 2014 and ironically endorsed by Amber Rudd herself require that all complaints of hate crime incidents are recorded, regardless whether or not those making the complaint are the victim, and irrespective of whether or not there is any evidence to identify the hate crime incident. Amber Rudd is not the first person, of course, to suggest making it harder for British companies to employ migrants. Do you remember this guy?
British jobs for British workers.
That's right, Gordon Brown, back in 2007. Did he have a point? To get involved, please call me on 0345 6060 973. Text me at 84850. You can tweet me on @LBC, but don't forget the hashtag Farage on LBC. And you can watch the show on Facebook Live. Go to the LBC Facebook page. Now, I suspect we're going to get some pretty strong opinions, and we're going to start with Kevin in Rugby. Kevin, what do you make of all of this?
Hello, Nigel. It's a pleasure to speak to you.
Good evening.
I've listened to the speech, which can be more than we could said for some people like James O'Brien or the Professor. I think that the speech she gave, I think she was perfectly right, and she was fine to say that politicians should be looking after British people, that they should take priority when it comes to finding jobs. That's what we elect politicians for, to look after our best interests.
So you think, Kevin, do you think, Kevin, for example, it would be legitimate for a company to place an advert in a local newspaper saying only those with British passports may apply?
I think it would be perfectly fine, because it's also perfectly fine and perfectly legal, apparently, to put an advert out stating that only people who can speak Polish can apply for this job, because that's what's happened in the past. The only logical reason that a company would employ a disproportionately large amount of people who are not citizens would be because they accept lower standards of living, and I don't think that's right. just look at Sports Direct in Shirebrook. They employ huge amounts of Europeans, and that's caused lots of tensions there.
I have to say, Kevin, that I did, before this programme started, check with an employment lawyer, get a piece of advice, and I was told that it would in fact be unlawful under the Equalities Act of 2010 to state that a person could be treated unfavourably, i.e. not offering them grounds, unemployment because, for example, they were Polish or Ghanaian. So I think actually with the law as it currently stands, if you advertise to say British workers only, or you advertise to say Polish workers only, I think at the moment you are breaking the law. Interestingly, I did campaign in the 2015 general election on a manifesto that said that it should not be against the law to say that you would, if you possibly could, prioritise British workers. But as it is, I think you'd have a real problem doing this. I suspect that there is discrimination based on nationality in the UK market. And interestingly, I think it works both ways, because I think some employers actually do want to employ Eastern European workers. Now, there are two possible reasons for this. One is they actually probably maybe work harder. The other is they are much easier to exploit in terms of conditions, in terms of hours, and everything else. And I came up against, Kevin, an example of this in 2009. I was out campaigning outside Peterborough Cathedral, and I met a 16-year-old girl who'd applied for a job on a packing line, where they get broccoli and they put cellophane round it, and it involved quite a lot of hydraulics and moving parts. And she told me she didn't get the job because she couldn't speak Polish, and there was a hell of a row over it. So, Kevin, I'm afraid I think we need a change in the law. Would you like to see that change?
I would, yes. Could I ask you a very related question about UKIP?
You can, yeah.
The UKIP say they identify as a civic nationalist party, which means that people should feel like they belong to a country because of their beliefs as opposed to their ancestry. But in quite a lot of parts of the country, some white working class people who've been living there their whole lives on the same streets, who felt the effects of mass immigration more than most, no longer feel like they're part of the same country they grew up in. Don't you feel like they should have a right to be concerned about protecting their identity?
I think people are worried about this, and they should have a right, and in fact they do express that right. And in some ways, a lot of those people did in the referendum go out and say, look, we are not against immigration, but we're against open doors, and we're against huge transformations that have taken place within our communities without anyone being asked. Kevin, I hope that answers your question. I wonder what Ben in Charing Cross thinks about the fact that the Home Secretary is now on a register as somebody who's been involved with a hate incident.
Well, to be honest, hi Nigel.
Hello.
Hello. To be honest, it's more of a question for you, because what I find amazing is that, in actual fact, you're a complete hypocrite.
Oh, go on.
You're married to a German lady, yeah, a German who works.
Hang on, Ben. I'm missing something. So have I said that I dislike all foreigners? Is that what you're trying to say?
Well, more or less, or as they say in Spanish, más o menos.
Well, I'm sorry, matey, but I think you might have you might just have got the wrong end of the stick here.
No. Let me finish. Please let me finish, because all the rhetoric that's been bounded around Brexit and this and the other, and we don't want the foreigners in. Now, for example, my fiancée... I'm sorry, Ben. Who said that? Who said we don't want the foreigners in? I mean, were you listening to the Brexit debate? Of course I listened to the Brexit debate. I spent a long time and I've heard all the different sides. And the problem is that maybe, it's like stirring a hornet's nest, effectively. You tell me, Ben, when I once, ever, made a comment that was anywhere near what you've just alleged. Well, so do you not think that the poster that was put out with, the very famous poster, do you not think that incited some kind of xenophobia? I think Mrs Merkel contributed hugely to us winning the Brexit referendum through the absolute madness of saying, as many as can come... There's no point putting Mrs Merkel in, because I'm not talking about Mrs Merkel. What I'm saying is, effectively, if somebody, for example, I work for an investment bank, a multinational investment bank. Now, my fiancée works in Madrid, and she wants to move, or she has got a job here. But it worries me a lot, because it's one rule for you and one for everyone else. You've got your German wife and children and everything like that. Right, so that's all happy days. But now you're making it very, very difficult, and also you're inciting the country. British jobs for British people. No, it doesn't matter. Everyone in Europe is the same. So the problem with the immigration, and this is the key point to me, the problem with the immigration has never really been within Europe. Okay, because we've got a lot of expats living in Spain or Italy.
I don't know where you've been living, Ben. I don't know where you've been living. But actually, we have an open door now to nearly 500 million people. And as EU members, which we still are, we have absolutely no control whatsoever. And that's why we voted Brexit. Not because we dislike anybody. Actually, we want to be fairer to people from other...
Do you not think that the fact that the migration into this country is more from outside of Europe than inside of Europe? And the people that come from inside of Europe, I guess, generally, well, I'm sure most of them have a job, they come here, they pay their taxes, and they contribute to the society. Okay, so there's a small minority, of course, that don't. And that's going to happen anyway. But if we were really, really wanted to take control of our borders, why aren't we looking at those from outside of Europe?
Well, Ben, actually, you're right, because right now, you know, if you're an Indian engineer or a New Zealand doctor, it's very, very difficult to get into Britain. What we've done is we've now discriminated against people who don't live in European countries, who may have the skills and the talent that actually would benefit this country in favour of a total open door to absolutely everybody. I would say this to you, Ben. I'm sorry to upset you and disappoint you. I don't dislike foreigners. I love Europe and the world. I just want us to have a sensible, balanced system. A speech about foreign workers given by the Home Secretary Amber Rudd back in October has today officially been recorded as a hate incident. Should it ever have been investigated as a hate incident in the first place? You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show exclusively here on LBC. It's 7:15. The Home Secretary gives a speech in October at the Tory party conference and says she thinks we should put British jobs as priorities over foreigners. If British people can do the jobs. And there's a report, and today the police say the matter has been recorded in line with the National Police Chiefs Council manual as a non-crime hate incident. So next to Amber Rudd's name, somewhere on a file, is the fact that she's been involved with a non-crime hate incident. And I'm asking you, should this ever have been investigated as a hate incident in the first place? Well, the caller before the break was Ben, who was really having a bit of a pop. And if you want to have a pop, please ring 0345 6060 973. Go to LBC's Facebook page, get involved. I'd love to hear from you. Ben, I have to say, has stirred up a bit of interest. A tweet here. Ben just heard and hears what he wants to hear. Tell him to come and work on a building site for a day. He might change his mind. There's quite a few like this. Ben, oh gosh, that's too rude. I can't do that. Right, I better go in that case to Sabina in Fulham. Sabina, what do you make of all of this?
Okay, good evening, Nigel Farage.
Good evening.
I understand there is a problem, and I do agree there needs to be a solution. What I do not agree with, and it's very simple. First, putting the burden of restraining immigration on employers is not the good way to go in my mind, because we're in a free market and it's offer and demand. The second thing is, if you start discriminating in employment against foreign citizens who are citizens before they're foreign, where do you stop? Do you say then NHS for British people first? Schools for British people first? Why can't we find a win-win, more inclusive solution which doesn't pitch citizen against citizen? Find a solution. We all live in Britain. We all care about what's happening here. So just find a positive solution which doesn't discriminate one part of the citizens against the other.
I've got one, Sabina. Sabina, I've got one. I've got a really great solution for you. Here it is. From 1950 until the year 2000, net migration into the United Kingdom ran at a net 30,000 a year. And if you go back to politics in Britain in the 1990s, immigration was an issue that was barely even mentioned. Indeed.
Yes. Okay, let me just say
so what I'm saying, Sabina, is why don't we get back?
Very good date.
Why don't we get back to the year 2000 and do this sensibly?
So that's when the British colonies were freed. So it's just people paying the visit back. You've allowed them into this country. If it was a mistake, well, it's done. Now that they're there, treat them like citizens. Okay?
Sabina, I don't think...
It's a very good day.
Sabina, I don't think you're listening to me. I'm saying that for half a century, we had an immigration policy in this country that led to a net 30,000 people every year. We now have an open door to a large part of the world, and not a very secure one to the rest of it, and it's now running at over 10 times that number. And the argument is that it is running at too high a level, that it has made it more difficult for people to get jobs, it's driven down wages, and all we want is to have a proper debate about it without people like the Home Secretary being reported and now being registered as having been involved in a hate incident. Surely, Sabina, that can't make sense.
It doesn't make sense.
No.
We have a problem. Let's solve it together. Let's solve it in an inclusive way. We have lots of foreigners now, as you said rightly, since 1950, coming from the former colonies, coming from countries that have been visited by British people without any invitation. They're here now. They're contributing. They're honest people. Let's not discriminate against them. Let's stop immigration or drive it down through other policies which do not affect UK citizens, no matter what their origin is.
Sabina, we both want, and I'm pleased you agree with me that it's unnecessary what the police have been forced to do here. We both want the same thing, Sabina. We want a happy, civilised, settled, ordered society that's at ease with itself. I'm just suggesting by reducing the huge flow we have at the minute, we'll get there rather more quickly. Sabina, thank you. Now, you'd think from some of these calls that I'm the first person that's ever said that perhaps we ought to put the interests of our own people first. Someone got there before me.
British jobs for British workers.
Gordon, perhaps. Should we report Gordon? Is Gordon guilty of inciting race hatred by daring, when he was Prime Minister in 2007, to suggest that British workers should be at the front of the queue when it came for jobs? I don't think so. I wonder what Marky in Warrington makes of all this. Marky, what do you think? Are our boys in blue? Are they doing the right thing, following the law?
Unbelievable. What a complete waste of time, honestly, and resources. How can anyone take this? I mean, she's saying it exactly how it is. I mean, I like the fact, the first call that you had tonight, Kevin, you know, he's the only one so far who spoke sensibly. I don't know where it's planned the others two are from, certainly not on Earth.
Well, we all have views, Marky. We all have views. I mean, it's a very democratic programme.
Oh, yeah, no, it is very democratic, but they obviously don't live near where these areas are overrun by the Polish Ukrainians. I mean, I worked last year, I did just one shift at a top high street clothing company, M&S. I've just said it now.
It's too late now, mate.
Anyway, in the warehouse, and 99% of the staff were Polish and Ukrainian. There was only 4 English lads on the packing line, and we only lasted the one shift. The reason, right, communication, and they couldn't communicate with us. None of them even spoke English, seriously, and that's, you know, it's ridiculous. So, yeah, Amber Woods hit the nail on the head, and I like the fact that nothing was done when Gordon Brown said the same thing.
No.
So, you know, all of a sudden everyone's getting all this, like, Brexit, which is going on. It's dragging too long for me. The sooner we get out of Europe, the better. But everyone's, like, taking it as, like, oh, people who voted to get out are racist. That'd be hell.
Well, I mean, Marky, this all began, I mean, the Criminal Justice Act in 2003 was brought in by New Labour. And that now says, so if, for example, Marky, you were, prosecuted for a crime, burglary, assault, or whatever it was, if the court believed that your motivation wasn't just crime for financial gain, for argument's sake, with burglary, but behind it you had some racial motive or you dislike someone's sexuality, you'd actually get a higher sentence for that. And I think that legislation began in 2003 with New Labour, but actually Amber Rudd has really been hoist with her own petard, because it was under a Tory-led administration that we got to these new definitions of what is a hate incident. Marky, just one quick question for you. You know, one of the things that is said, when it comes to working on packing lines or whatever it is that in many cases, these are jobs that British workers don't want to do and that's why we have to have foreign labour.
I'm sick of hearing that.
Right.
We're capable and we want to do anything. The fact is, I mean, here in Cheshire, I mean, you're very, very lucky that the high unemployment rate is for the English, because the jobs have been took up by, I mean, I'm not racist. I mean, I am a proud supporter and member of UKIP, and I want to be more active in that as well. So we'll see how that goes in the future. I mean, I'm highly honoured to be speaking to you, because my...
Sweet of you, Marky, and I wish you luck with future employment, and thank you for your contribution. And I wonder what Daniel in Tottenham makes of all of this.
Yeah, hi, Nigel.
Hello.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to ask you a question, which is, in the context of there's 500 million people waiting to walk through our open door policy.
Well, I don't know whether they are, but they're able to.
Well, that's right, they're able to. And we're a country with a population of 70 million odd. I'm just always intrigued why you think 160,000 odd people is a significant number.
Daniel, what I really think is that on current trends, we will have by 2045 a population of 80+ million people, and immigration is the big spur towards us heading for that huge number. And I actually think that by doing that, or allowing that to happen to our country, that in fact our standard of life, our quality of life, will diminish as a result. And I think we need to get a grip, Daniel. Simple as that.
But based on 160,000 on 70 million, so you think our way of life is
well, actually,
significantly impacted with those types of stats?
Actually, Daniel, our net migration figure, our official net migration figure, is running at bang on 1/3 people every single year.
No, I'm talking about European Union.
Well, we're talking about
not outside European Union.
Well,
I think European Union's about 160, 170, isn't it?
At the moment, it is. But who's to say what it'll be next year? Who's to say if the eurozone crashes, what it will be?
Yeah, no, but we don't have to worry about what it's going to be. We can worry about.
Oh, we do. We have to worry hugely, Daniel, about what it's going to be. After all, we haven't even triggered Article 50 yet. So how many more people will come? Anyway, Daniel, I think you're missing the point. My question to you was, do you think that Amber Rudd should have been investigated for what she said being a hate incident in the first place?
No.
Good. Excellent. We found some agreement. Thank you. Your text, tweets and Facebook messages coming in. I get a hate crime. Codswallop, like Plebgate, waste of taxpayers' money. This country can't afford it. Where's the common sense? That comes in from a Mrs. Steed. Immigration is used by lazy and greedy employers who won't spend good money on training the British unemployed. That comes from Persistent Pete. And on Facebook, Pierre Joseph says, if you are working class and voted for Brexit, you are a useful idiot. Congratulations. You've traded your employee rights in exchange for kicking out some immigrants. Well, it's a view, Pierre Joseph, not one that I recognise, but I thank you for it. Lottie says, human jobs for human people. Lottie, I know some people think we're all world citizens. Jeremy Corbyn is certainly one of them. And Nicola says, it is the government that is destroying the economy, and it is Farage who wants to privatise the health service. No, Blair did that, actually. Nicola, look back. Blair, it was Blair that privatised big chunks of the health service. Right, OK. We better move on from here. And we better say that a speech about foreign workers by the Home Secretary Amber Rudd back in October has been reported as a hate incident. Should it ever have been investigated? You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. It's time for the news with Rupert Bartier.
Drivers are being warned
about whether the police should ever have investigated Amber Rudd for a hate incident in the first place, but a bit of stop press. The Sun newspaper have just gone online, and this is about Nick Clegg and comments he made about the Queen. Queen did attack EU. Grumpy Queen did have a go at me over EU, admits former Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg. Apparently she accused the rise of Brussels for downgrading the role of the Commonwealth, which she leads. Friends of Clegg last night insisted he did not call the Queen grumpy, but his spokeswoman refused to make any comment. So Nick Clegg, once more embroiled in this dispute as to what the Queen did or did not say. I think the evidence is becoming clearer that Elizabeth was a Brexiteer. It's looking clearer and clearer and clearer. But back to this question, where our Home Secretary, who funnily enough has always been considered to be on the left of the Conservative Party, not a hardliner on immigration or anything else, but she said at the Tory Party conference, she mirrored what the former Prime Minister, Gordon Brown, had said. Do you remember what he said? I remember what he said.
British jobs for British workers.
Absolutely. It's the only thing I've ever agreed with Gordon about, actually. So she mirrored, really, what he'd said. That got reported. She was then a professor from Oxford University, reported her to the police, and they, today, have registered her as somebody who was involved with a hate incident. I think it is a shocking waste of police time and money. I really, genuinely do. But I wonder what Andy in Leicester makes of it.
Hi, good evening, Nigel.
Good evening.
Yeah. You made a comment sort of 5-10 minutes ago, referenced Eastern European workers.
Yes.
And their work ethic. Now,
yes.
I'm obviously not. I work for a equal opportunities employer, and I can be honest with you, some of the calibre, qualifications, and just general academic abilities of the Eastern Europeans that come through, as well as Sri Lankans, far outstrips a lot of the homegrown English people that we interview and employ. It has nothing to do with training, or the training is provided afterwards. If they're successful, it's the lead up to it, the way they adapt and deliver themselves at the interview. Their previous far outstrips a lot of the homegrown English people that we interview and employ. It has nothing to do with training, or the training is provided afterwards. If they're successful, it's the lead up to it, the way they adapt and deliver themselves at the interview. Their previous experience from either the home country or gained in this country absolutely sets them apart from a lot of the English people. I think where employers give this a whole bad name are the employers that are employing the Eastern Europeans illegally and not following a routine, not following a process. And the big question there is, what else are they not following as regards tax returns and everything else?
Yeah, there is, Andy, an issue here with exploitation too, isn't there?
Not necessarily, not whilst ever we're part of the EU. I get afterwards that potentially that could be different. However, whilst ever we're part of the union, as we currently still are, I voted for out.
Yep.
Whilst ever we're still part of it, it's still within the law, just like everything else was within the law until that law's changed.
No, I get, Andy, listen, you're an employer. You've got to employ people who will give you the best level of productivity within the law as it stands at any moment in time. And I understand that. And there are people, there are economists who say, actually, having this huge supply of labour coming from Eastern Europe has been good because it's kept wage inflation down. But I have to be honest with you, I think the fact that so many British people feel they've been pushed aside, feel they're being talked down about, and even for those in work, have had such massive pressures on their take-home pay. Overall, we have to ask ourselves a question. Is what is good for employers necessarily good for the broader communities in which they operate? That is perhaps my slight problem here.
Nigel, when you work for a company big enough that gives a balanced pay salary, no matter what your background,
Yep.
education, and demographics of where you come from originally, that argument doesn't stand up. What stands up is your work ethic, the way that you apply yourself in work, far outstripped from Eastern European. Maybe that's what they've been brought up with. Maybe that's the way they've learnt from very young age, that they have to work to live, and what they're over in the UK doing is just enhancing that.
Andy, you make a perfectly fair point. There are a lot of people who have come into this country in the last few years from Eastern Europe who are well-educated, well-mannered, learn English very quickly or bring it with them and work hard. I absolutely accept and get that point. Thank you. Nigel, your Little Englanders are lazy and don't want to work, says Bilal of Mayfair. Well, I think it's wrong, actually, to say that all British youth is lazy and doesn't want to work. Perhaps there are some, but there are many who feel they're being somewhat done down. Nigel, I don't understand why what Mrs Rudd said was so shocking. At what point did the principal concern of the UK government stop being the welfare of UK citizens? Rob, I'll tell you the answer to that when we joined the European Union. And Facebook messages coming in. Andrew says there's nothing wrong with patriotism. Francis says Europeans pay into the EU. The EU funds so much, including helping to subsidise the NHS. Not sure I buy that, Francis, but it is an opinion. But back to the calls. I wonder what Mark in Brentwood makes of all of this. Mark, good evening.
Yeah, good evening, Nigel. The point I wanted to make was my wife's Brazilian. But in 2013, we had to... I saw a loophole news night that if you went and lived in Europe and get residency, you can come back with a non-EU spouse. So that's what we did.
Yeah.
But in 2013, December, January the 1st, 2013, Cameron and Clegg changed the law and stopped a loophole. And my point is that not a hate crime against non-EU people?
Well, possibly it is. I mean, actually...
Well, it's the exact same philosophy, isn't it?
It may not be a hate crime.
It changed the law. So when we did have a problem getting back in the country, but we were married. We got married abroad.
Yeah.
But she got a visa, and we ended up getting a 5-year visa. But it's the same principle. It was anti-non-EU people.
I think there is a difference here, by the way, between hate crimes and hate incidents. So let's just remember that Amber Rudd, has not been accused by the police or is not going to be convicted or go through any prosecution for a hate crime. She's just registered as somebody who's been involved with a hate incident. And a hate incident can be anyone that is a victim or anyone else that thinks somebody was a victim that was motivated by something that was said to do with hostility or prejudice based on whether somebody is disabled, their race, their religion, their transgender identity, their sexual orientation. In fact, in some police areas, I think Manchester, Greater Manchester, are leading the charge here. It can include if you're a goth or a punk. So we're actually getting to the level where virtually any comment to anybody, I mean, you're a bloke. Perhaps if I make some comment and you could say that I was sexist against you because you were... I just don't know, Mark. Hate crime, hate crime is a bit saner because you look at the list of things under hate crimes and they are things that are crimes anyway. It's just that they're adjudged to be slightly worse if there was some motivation of hate behind it. So, Mark, I don't know whether you've got a case on this or not.
No, I don't mean it in a literal sense. I just say in a sort of, I can't think of the word, sort of sarcastic type.
Yeah, sure.
Because if the one thing's a hate crime, everything's a hate crime, isn't it?
I think potentially everything we say and do could be a hate incident. So thank you very much indeed for your call. Jacob says the only kind of migration that should be stopped is illegal migration. Economic migrants from the globe are more than welcome in my mind. Dave says every other country in the EU and around the world have patriotic citizens. The French are proud and buy French goods. The Spanish are the same. Here, we're told it is wrong. We, I have to say, are getting a very interesting cross-section of views on this. A lot of you ringing up to have a real pop at me. Well, that's fine. It's all good fun. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show exclusively here on LBC. It's 7:45. Secretary Amber Rudd was recorded in line with the National Police Chiefs Council manual as being involved in a non-crime hate incident. Should the police ever have investigated this? I really don't think they ought to have done, but I wonder what Lydia in Bedford thinks. Good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. And by the way, I'm a UKIP member because of you. But anyway, you've left since, but I hope you come back. But anyway,
I haven't left completely, I've just stepped back a little bit. But anyway, Lydia,
okay.
What do you make of this?
Well, you've inspired me to take an interest in politics. That's good. I disagreed with the man before that said that British people don't want to work in his firm. I disagree vehemently with that because I have seen people over the years getting bypassed for jobs because they give it to other nationalities. Now, the thing is, it's not against nationalities, but they send their money home to a cheaper country to live. We pay high mortgages in this country. We pay high rent. You've got to give the British man a livable wage, or how's he going to live? That's my argument with that one.
Lydia, I get that. And should the police have spent this time investigating Amber Rudd?
I disagree it was a hate crime from Amber Rudd, but I will say something about Amber Rudd. She was a staunch Remainer.
Oh, yes.
She's now been made Home Secretary by staunch Remainer Theresa May. I wouldn't believe a word they say to the Brexiteers just for our voices to hear and our ears to hear. I believe that what they say in public and what they do, she's been letting in illegal migrants without any documentation behind our backs. I mean, the migration's risen since she's been in power. The same to do with Theresa May, actually.
We had 6 years of Theresa May and huge numbers. We've got Amber Rudd now and still huge numbers. Lydia, thank you for your call. Slightly rotten line. I wonder what Ben in Oxford makes of all of this. Ben, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel.
So what do you think, Ben?
Well, as someone who's quite young, I chose not to go to university. I think the problem with this whole situation stems from this whole disdain for free speech in universities. It started in America and has come over here, and it's sort of breaching its way into our politics, that people aren't allowed to say anything without it being some sort of crime against someone. I mean, it's starting to get ridiculous that, as you said earlier, everything that anyone could say can be considered a hate crime at the moment.
Yes. Well, not necessarily a hate crime, Ben, but certainly, as I read out to you before the break, a hate incident is virtually anything anyone says to anybody that can be reported not by the person who is seen to be the victim, but by somebody else, a third party, who perceives this to have been said on the basis of what they think might be prejudice. And here's the problem, Ben. The problem is, once that report has been made, the police have to investigate it. The police have to assess it. And that, I think, really is my gripe. I think perhaps all of this in the beginning was well-intentioned. And perhaps we felt that in the past, certain minorities perhaps had been taking ritual abuse, and we had to try and use the law to do something about it. And I think, Ben, what I'm arguing is perhaps we've gone a bit too far. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree, and I think it is all coming from this, my generation, I'm only 18, coming from this sort of bubble-wrapped generation that don't want to get hurt by words. And not only is it the free speech element for the young people, I think when we talk about jobs earlier, I think it's, frankly, the whole university system's flawed, and a lot of the reason young British people can't get jobs is that they're put through pointless degrees that they actually don't need.
Yeah.
They need vocational,
Ben,
active...
It's a different debate, but I agree with you 100%. Too much emphasis on ologies, too little emphasis on trades and skills. Ben, thank you. I love this. This tweet's come in. That bloke who said British workers were lazy should be prosecuted for hate crime. And that's in from Deplorable Guy. Maybe not hate crime, but I do think there's the potential here for a hate incident. In fact, perhaps anybody that's been involved tonight could perhaps be reported. I just don't know. Another tweet. I thought the US was overly ridiculous with hate crime legislation, but a hate incident? Britain is doomed, says LB from Colorado. At the heart of this is the ridiculous, ever more ludicrous redefining what is and what isn't a hate crime. And that comes in from Chris. And on Facebook, John says it's all about numbers. There has to be greater control, irrespective of qualifications. The major reasons are, 1, wage compression, and 2, pressures on infrastructure and services. That is more a debate about immigration and numbers, but I know they're all linked in. What I'm really talking about is I think it's extraordinary that the Home Secretary, somebody who's been seen to be on the left of the Conservative Party, has her name now in a register somewhere, in a police office in the West Midlands, to say that she was involved with a non-crime hate incident. I find that absolutely bizarre. I wonder what James in York thinks.
Well, incidents like this, you just feel like giving up on your country sometimes. I mean, I've never heard anything as ridiculous. Is it a hate incident to put your own people first, the people who voted you in? I mean, we have 3 million people unemployed. We have an estimated 1.8 million people who are working part-time trying to get full-time. Estimated 11 million people have had their wages compressed. I mean, it seems to I've just never heard. I mean, do people not want this country to start, helping their own people? We've got a housing crisis, we've got a national health crisis, and over 600,000 people are settling in the country every single year. It's not rocket science. Why can't Liberals join the dots?
Do you know, James, there seems to be an assumption that anybody, whether it's Gordon Brown, whether it's Amber Rudd, whether it's me, that anybody that says, and I say I campaigned in 2015 in the general election arguing for a change in the law, anyone that campaigns that says it is the first duty of a British government to put the interests of its own people first, there is an assumption that because you say that, it means you hate everybody else from the rest of the world. And it simply, James, is not true. And I hope that the sort of global revolution that began in 2016 with Brexit and went on to Trump, and who's to say where it might go across the rest of Europe or the world this year, I hope we will get back to just a common-sense idea that nation-state democracies wish to make their own laws, control their lives, control their borders, and put their own people first. James, I know you would endorse that thoroughly, but I wonder what Dan in Dartford thinks about this.
Mr. Farage, I'm extremely appreciative of this opportunity to actually talk to you.
Yeah.
I do agree with you completely. I agree with you completely that what the professor did was wrong. I believe the professor do have to make apology because you can't take up an issue when you haven't comprehensively listened to the whole details. As a professor, he should have listened to the whole speech and then decide whether it's offensive or not. As far as I'm concerned, I listened. I think she was quite right. I think it's a responsibility of this government or any government in this country to make sure that those who live in this country have access to the right job that they deserve. So I think that's exactly what she was trying to say. And the companies that are in this country, they have a responsibility as much as every other company in other country to train people that are ready to be trained for a job that is available within the need of the company. And that's absolutely normal.
Dan, I think you win the prize for the most logical argument that has been made tonight, that surely a university professor actually studies a text before making a complaint to the police. I love it. You're absolutely, completely and utterly right. He was too busy listening to whether it was James at LBC or whether it was somebody else, I don't know, but he sort of heard what he heard and decided it was wrong. But the problem that I'm raising, Dan, the point that I'm making is whether his reasons were good or bad, the fact that he reported it meant the West Midlands Police had to investigate it. And I think that's a waste of time. I think it's a waste of taxpayers' money. I'm sure, Dan, you would agree with that point.
Because I've had incidents, a more serious incident in the past where I called the police because they would tell me they don't have the resources to come.
Yeah.
So I am surprised to see them actually investigating these sorts of business issues.
I know. Well,
I would, before I get off the air, I actually have disagreed with you a whole lot of time.
Dan, listen, Dan, I've got to move on. You've made your points beautifully, and I've got one quick last point that's coming in from Jack from St Ives. Jack, what have you got to say?
Hi there, Nigel. Great to talk
Hi.
to you. Hi. I mean, what you described earlier was a hate incident. You described it. So It's not a fully fledged hate crime, is it?
No.
And is this new legislation that's coming in, is it? Or?
Yeah, basically the original Criminal Justice Act in 2003 has been added to, and since 2014, the police forces have been, with the full collusion of a Conservative-led government now dealing with these hate incidents. And I'm arguing it's all gone too far. Jack, I've got to let you go. My final thought is this: we don't want to go back to the bad old days where minorities have abuse heaped upon them, but this legislation has now, frankly, gone too far. It is a waste of police time and money for people like Amber Rudd to be investigated over this. We need to rethink the legislation. This is bad law that needs changing. Now, I have just finished my first week doing this show. I hope you've enjoyed listening and engaging with the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. I'll be back next week from Monday to Thursday between 7 and 8, and you can catch up with any of this with LBC's podcast service at lbc.co.uk. Coming up at 10, it's Ian Collins, but up next, it's Clive Bull.
Thank you, Nigel, and